Hello and welcome to class time. Let's begin. So we had started looking at persuasive devices and techniques, and we're going to continue that look today. So here are today's objectives. So of course, at the end of the lesson, you'll be able to discuss various persuasive techniques, analyze examples of persuasive techniques, and create examples of persuasive techniques. Before we start though, let's go through a little scenario with you. So, have you ever had to do any of these things? First one, have you ever had to convince a teacher to accept your late assignment? I'm sure at least once in our lives, everyone had to do this because things happen. So, what were the things you had to do to convince this teacher that they shouldn't take marks off if they do accept it? Or if it's that type of teacher, what did you have to say in order to convince the teacher to accept it in the first place? Did you have to give reasons? Did you have to beg and plead? Did you have to just say, Miss, Sir, I'm sorry? What were the things you had to do to be convincing enough for this teacher to take that work from you, late as it is? Next scenario. Have you ever had to convince your parent or guardian to buy you a new or possibly just any phone, tablet, laptop, video game, anything of that nature? Now, think about this prior to the whole stay at home and learning, because prior to that, these were not necessarily high on the list of priorities. So you had a phone, possibly, something happened to it. Of course, you might not have the money to buy it. So you have to go to mommy, daddy, uncle, older sister, older brother, whoever it is, and say, I need a new phone. What were some of the reasons you had to give? What were some of the things you had to do? Again, did you have to list out the pros and cons of not having a phone? Did you have to point out that, you travel far to school and anything can happen along the way and you need a phone in order to communicate with them? Did you have to tell them that the laptop did not crash because of anything you did, but because it was just its time? Did you have to convince them that a video game is necessary for you to unwind because stress is a part of life and that is how you manage stress? So what were some of the things you had to say to convince this person to buy you any of these items prior to now? Switch to present day. Now that you are at home and learning from home, perhaps there is a device in the house and you're being told to use that one. What are some of the reasons you want to give now to get your own device to use? All of this incorporates persuasion. So let's look at our next scenario. Have you ever had to convince a friend to lend you something important to them? So your friend has something you want to borrow. However, it's something that is important. Now, my thing is books. To lend out a book is like lending my child, because chances are you might not return that book to me and I will miss that book as much or nearly as much as I would miss my child. So to convince me to lend you a book, you'd really have to get down and bring out everything. So what does your friend have that you want that is important to the friend? And how are you going to convince your friend to lend it to you, knowing that there's a possibility they won't get it back? So again, what are some of the strategies you'd have to employ to achieve that? Our last one now, and this one is very common. Have you ever had to convince a sibling to give you some of their food? No. Think of it. If you have an older sibling or a younger sibling, the approach would be different. Because a younger sibling, you can take possibly a more authoritative stance because you are the dominant sibling, you're the older one. But if you're the younger one, then your stance, your approach would have to be different because you're the baby and they're older. So you might have to appeal to some sense of emotion, appeal to some sense of responsibility in that sibling to get them to give you some of the food that they really don't want to give you because you ate yours already and now you take your long belly and want some of theirs. So all these situations, whether you realize it or not, require you to be persuasive. And the strategies we're going to learn today can help you with any of these situations if they come up again, all right? So here are the techniques we're going to be looking at today. So the first one, the use of appeals. Now, focus on the word appeal. When you appeal, what do you do? Think about it carefully. All right, so under appeals, we look at the 3 pillars of persuasion: ethos, logos, pathos. Greek terms. We're learning some Greek as well as English language today because that's how we roll. So ethos is Greek for character. And under ethos, the focus is on the speaker's trustworthiness. So you're thinking of a scenario where you are trying to impress upon your audience that you are capable of their trust. You are deserving of their trust. They should be comfortable trusting you. So you're establishing yourself as someone they can rely on, someone who they can believe in. And that is, of course, important when you're trying to persuade somebody, because if you're a shady character, then right there, you have a much harder job of convincing someone to take your side or to believe your story. So with ethos, you are building your character, building a semblance of trustworthiness. So the types of appeal under this would be appeal to character and appeal to credibility, because you're establishing yourself as somebody who they can believe in. So how do we achieve this? You take care to make sure that you show more than one side of an issue before you take a side. So you are trying to show them that you are fair. So you show them these are the pros, these are the cons. However, this is the side I would like you to lean towards. So you're giving the impression that you're a fair-minded individual. You're not being judgmental in any way. So you also would employ the use of a counter-argument. So the counter-argument now will show what the opposition will do. So you have a little appeal to opposition going on there. And even though you're going to show what the opposition might come with, you're still going to use that to lead into your thesis, what your argument is based on. So the whole synopsis of this is that you want to show that you are not biased in any way, even if you are. But you want to show, you want to give the impression that you are not biased. Now, another thing you can do is to emphasize your reputation. So in the exam, you're given various scenarios. And in these scenarios, you're free to choose a persona. So when you're writing, you don't have to write as a 5th form, 4th form, continuing student. You can take on a new persona when you write. So when you take on that new persona, you can establish your reputation in your essay. So you can speak to who you are. You can speak to what knowledge you have. You can speak to what traits you have that make you trustworthy, that make you reliable, that make you believable. Now the next one, logos. And logos is Greek for word. So under this, you're looking at reason and logic, because there are those of us who need logical reasons to believe something. So there are those people who will believe you because of who you are, and there are those who you have to convince based on their ability to reason out. So you have to give them 1 + 1 = 2. So these would take in your appeals to authority. And that means you're going to bring in opinions of experts in the field. Now be very careful. The whole idea of an authority figure is someone who is qualified to speak on that. So if you're going to bring an argument regarding money and money issues, then of course, if you're going to talk about an authority figure, it would have to be someone who is involved in the field of money. So an economist, someone who is a business person, a banker, that sort of person, somebody who is qualified in the field. If it is a health issue, then of course someone with a medical background would be an authority figure. So even though the name says doctor, if it's not a doctor of medicine, then you're going to have an issue there. So you need to make sure that whoever you use in your quotation, whoever you use as the person you are referring to, needs to have a specific and direct link to the area that you're talking about. So here's an example. Professor Tran's extensive research in this area leaves little doubt that. So right there, you have told your audience that this professor has done research in this field. So this person has a lot of experience. And because they have a lot of experience, then we can trust what they have to say. And if we can trust what they have to say, then we can also trust what you have to say, because you are the one who is drawing on this reference. So this, of course, reassures your audience, your reader, your listener, whoever it is, that your viewpoint is solid. Your viewpoint is shared by somebody who knows what they're talking about. And again, it appeals to logic. So I have said this. This person who is qualified in the field has also said this. Therefore, take our side. Under pathos now, look carefully. Pathos is Greek for suffering or experience. Interesting, isn't it? So the focus here now is on the values or the beliefs of your audience. So you are focusing not on yourself. You're not focusing on who you're quoting. You're now focusing on who is listening to you or who is reading your work. So the types of appeal here would be the direct personal appeal and, of course, appeals to emotions. Now, keep in mind, when you appeal to persons on an individual level, it does something for that person. You have designed your argument to specifically target someone, so they feel personally invested in what you're saying. And when you appeal to emotions, once you can appeal to somebody's emotions, you can get them to do almost anything, because emotions are a powerful driving force. So if you can appeal to that, then your argument is well on its way to being accepted. So here's how it works. So you address the individual directly. So you're going to use your pronoun you. So the person feels as if you're talking to them specifically. You have singled them out. You have identified this person in your audience, and you're speaking to that person in your audience, even though you're really speaking to everybody. But they feel as if you have designed it just for them. Now here's an example of how you can do this. So enough is enough. Let us speak out against oppression. So you have used us. So you have included yourself with them. So you have made them feel that they are a part of this movement that you're trying to gain. And then the next thing, speak out against oppression. That is something that a lot of people would be passionate about. Nobody likes to see anybody being oppressed. Nobody likes being oppressed themselves. So that is something they can identify with, something they can relate to, and something you can use to help win your argument. And of course, once it suggests people's safety, security, or freedom are at risk, then of course you can motivate them to join you, because nobody wants to feel unsafe. Nobody wants to feel insecure. Nobody wants to feel as if they're in bondage. So these are powerful driving forces to get them to take what you have to say. So how do you achieve emotional appeal? So of course it's through the diction, the word choice. And you'll notice through all of English language, every study you do in English language, your choice of words carry weight. Your choice of words are what will push whatever you're saying ahead. So the diction can arouse hopes, fears, desires, anger, sympathy, any strong emotion. The words you choose, and if you choose them carefully, have that effect. So here's an example now. So there are plans for our national helpline. This should be fast-tracked. In the desperate late-night hours, a prompt reply could make the difference between life and death. Now notice the words that are highlighted. These are words that can be used to stir up certain emotions. The word desperate, the word prompt, life and death. These are very strong emotive words. And of course, because you have done all this, the reader now will have an emotional reaction to what you have said. So the reader now is motivated. You have stirred up some fire deep in their soul. So you have stirred them to anger, you have stirred them to sympathy, you have stirred them to love, to sadness, whatever emotion you have pinpointed as the one you want to use. You have made that come to the fore, and now they are ready to accept what you're saying and to join you in whatever it is you want them to do. Yes, there is some amount of manipulation going on. That's the nature of persuasiveness. So let's look at this now. So try and think of some appeals you could use based on this scenario. So think of an argument for, an argument against based on this scenario. A vacation abroad is much better than one spent in your own country. Think of something you can use that is an appeal to either their emotions or their logic or anything of the sort that can support this. But also think of something that will oppose it. So think carefully. So here are two possible arguments you could have thought of. So to support, you could have said, studies by Dr. Faith Samuels, clinical psychologist, have shown that the overall rate of health and well-being experienced while on vacation is much higher among those who vacation abroad as opposed to those who remain in their own country. What type of appeal is this right here? What are the key words that tell you what kind of appeal this is? So it says studies by Dr. Faith Samuels. So you have incorporated somebody who has done studies in the area. So you have made an appeal to an authority. So right there, whoever is watching or listening will think, oh, so a doctor has done this study and this is the result of the study. So perhaps I really should go abroad instead of staying home for vacation. Now here's an argument against it. Think of the unexplored splendors in your own homeland that you will not be able to discover if you constantly vacation abroad. What type of appeal is this now? Have you incorporated a researcher or an authority figure? No, you haven't. So it's not an appeal to authority. Is it an appeal to logic in any way? Have you given any facts and figures? No, you haven't. But what you did was tap into how they feel. So you have said, think of the unexplored splendors in your own homeland that you will not be able to discover if you constantly. So you have kept telling them, you. So you have pulled them in, you have made it personal to them. You have made a personal appeal. So now we're going to look at using evidence, which you cannot overlook the importance of. You need evidence in your arguments. However, take it in stride. So, use of evidence should be obvious what it is. So it's information that is indisputable. So it's something that is basically a fact. So it shows an investigative study that was conducted, or it gives you some kind of support that something exists or something that has occurred. So of course, you achieve this how now? So you use facts, you use figures, you use statistics, you show the results of experiments, or you can actually use a personal experience as well. That's fine. And you can use quotes. So you can quote from something, you can quote from a study, you can quote from some authority figure as well here. And this is your use of evidence. So here's an example. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, males are 400% more likely to commit an offense intended to cause injury than are females. I do not know if this is true or not. However, what do I know? That according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, so a study was done And now I am showing the results of that study to support what I am doing. Now it says the evidence, because you have given it, this evidence now adds some weight to your argument. So your argument is no longer just hanging by a thread. It's no longer on a precarious perch. What it does is substantiate your argument. It makes your argument sound as if, yes, something really went like this for true. Something is going to happen because of this situation here. So when you give evidence, you are proving that you are right. And quite often, we need some proof. So we're using the same scenario. Same scenario. So keep that in mind. For all of what we're going to do is the same scenario. But this time, we want evidence. So think of how you can use evidence to support the argument that going away for vacation is better than staying home. And think of evidence that can show the opposite of that. So evidence that supports this notion, evidence that dispels this notion. Think carefully. So let's see what you could have said. So to support the notion, you could have said, over 65% of those who vacation abroad say they do so because it is more cost effective. So you have brought in evidence of people who have said they go abroad for vacation because it's cheaper for them to do so. To oppose it now, tourists report being targets of various crimes more when outside of their own country than when they vacation at home, according to police statements collected. Again, more evidence. So you have shown evidence to support the idea that to go away for vacation is better. And you can also find evidence to support the notion that staying at home for vacation is better. Rhetorical questions. What are those? So, of course, it's a question where no answer is expected. Why are you asking a question, though, if you don't expect an answer? There is a point behind it, so don't lose it yet. So you do this because you want to make a point or you want to deliver a message. So you ask the question really just to stimulate thought. So this is how we achieve it. So you pose a question where everybody knows what the answer is, because it's not the answer that you want. You're not focusing on getting an answer. What you really are focusing on is to lead your reader, lead your audience to a conclusion. And that is why you have asked the question. So here's an example now. When funding for public healthcare is reallocated, what then will happen to those who depend on these services? So that should be an obvious situation. If you have free healthcare and you pull the funding, then those who rely on it, those who can't afford private healthcare, are going to suffer. So you don't expect anyone to answer you, but you do expect them to think about the repercussions of this thing that you have suggested. So the questions make the audience think. And what are they going to think about? They're going to think about the message behind the question. So it's not the answer to the question that you want. You want them to think about the answer to the question. And you also want to use that now to open up another discussion, perhaps. So you're going to think about this. Same scenario, remember. So you're going to think about the idea of what rhetorical question can prove that going away for vacation is good, or what rhetorical question can be used to cause you to think about staying home instead. So let's see what you could have come up with. So to support it, you could have said, why would anyone choose to remain home while on vacation just to visit the same places they would have seen every day? And to oppose it, you could have said, would you really give up the comforts of home to face the hassle of traveling abroad on what should be your vacation? So right here, you see two examples of how you can use rhetoric or rhetorical question to support an argument or to oppose the argument. So now we're going to look at an analogy and the use of analogies. So what is it? Of course, we have to start there. So it's a form of reasoning which compares one thing with another in order to make a particular point. But hold on a little bit. In the previous lesson, we looked at two ways to compare, didn't we? We looked at metaphor and we looked at simile. So how is this different or similar to either of those? Now, the idea is in using an analogy, you might incorporate the simile, and you'll see that when you see more examples. So you will somehow have to use like or as at times in your comparison. But the idea is, and here's where the difference lies, you are comparing one thing to another in order to make a point. So you're not just saying this is like that and full stop. You're doing that for a greater purpose behind it. So it simplifies something that might be hard to understand. So you're using a complex situation. You want to show a complex situation, but you understand that not everybody quite gets it. So for instance, I was speaking to a colleague earlier. I'm not a math person. So if you want me to understand a math problem, you have to simplify it because I'm not going to get it. So using an analogy perhaps would work. So you're trying to let someone understand something complicated or something complex, and you compare it to something that they can relate to, that they already understand. And that connection now helps them to understand what you were trying to put out in the first place. So if you look at this situation, worrying is as effective as trying to solve an algebra equation by chewing bubble gum. And I just told you, me and math don't get along very well. We have a passing relationship, hi and bye, and that is it. So by telling me now that worrying is as effective as chewing bubblegum to try and solve a math problem, I understand clearly that worrying makes no sense because chewing bubblegum to solve a math problem makes no sense either. So those two things are being compared to make it easier for me to understand the concept you're trying to put across. So you compare the ideas to what the audience knows. So what they already know, you're using that to get them to what they don't know or don't quite understand, don't quite grasp. And when you do this now, they have a greater appreciation now of how things work. So they understand it and they can appreciate the nuances behind it. So, of course, you're going to have to come up with an analogy for this now. So, find an analogy that will support the idea of going away for vacation and another analogy that will support the idea of staying home for vacation. This one is going to be a little tricky because what are you going to compare either of these things to? But it can be done. Yes, it can. Ready? All right. So here's something to inspire you. So remember now, we're focusing on a vacation abroad is much better than one spent in your own country. And we're looking at an analogy that can support that. So here's a possibility. A vacation abroad is as pleasurable a prospect as experiencing all of your favorite childhood memories rolled into one. So you're asking them to think of everything good about their childhood, all their favorite things, probably visiting with cousins, possibly eating as much as they want, not having bills to pay. So you want them to think of all the good things about being a child. And now, after they have thought about all those good things about being a child, going away for vacation gives the same good feelings, all of them rolled into one. So all those lovely things you were remembering would give you the same feeling as going away for vacation. Now, to oppose it, you could say a vacation abroad has much the same appeal as a visit to the dentist for a tooth extraction. So you gave them wonderful memories to convince them to go, and now you have given them a horrible memory to convince them to stay. So the idea of having your tooth extracted by a dentist, not something you look forward to with glee and passion and gusto. So the idea of having to go away is supposed to engender the same type of feeling. You're not supposed to feel good about it. You're not supposed to long for it. You're not supposed to want to do it, because going away is going to give you that same feeling. Therefore, to avoid that feeling, tana your yard. So we're going to look at the use of anecdotes now. And think carefully. Anecdotes and the previous one, analogy, they sometimes get confused, but there are differences between them. So keep that in mind. The analogy, you're comparing one thing to another for the purpose of highlighting something, simplifying something so people can relate to one more. The anecdote now, slightly different, but it has the same general idea behind it. So you're going to relay a short account or a story, and usually this is something personal. So you're basically trying to use a personal situation, a personal experience to prove something. And one of the main benefits of this is that it's like you're putting yourself at the feet of your audience. You're laying yourself at their feet and asking them to accept you. So you are making yourself more relatable to them because you're giving your own personal experience. You're telling your own personal story for the most part. Sometimes the anecdote can be just an experience you heard of. So it's not your personal experience, but you can say, I once heard of a man who. So it's still by virtue of connectivity, connection, an experience you can share just the same. So how do we get to this point? So you use a short account of a particular incident or event. And of course, if you're going to use it, it should be something that your audience will find interesting or that they will find amusing. So it can be a funny story or it can be a thought-provoking story. But it should, again, be something that causes them to think, something that will be relatable to them. Because at the end of the day, remember, your aim is to use this to persuade them. So it must be something that they will have some amount of interest in. It can't just be a little one-away story that has no point. It must be something that they will find very interesting, that will provoke thought, or it must be something that they will find some humor in, something that they can laugh about and say, oh my goodness, I can't believe that happened to you. But the same thing happened to me, or it happened to a cousin of mine. And right there you have captured them, because right there they can relate to you. And you're using this, of course, to support a claim. So think of this example. When I tried to apply online, I was met with so many roadblocks that I almost gave up. So again, you have used a personal situation. And this is something quite a few people can identify with, especially now, because much of what people used to do in person is now being done either over the phone or via computer or other device. So by telling them that in trying to apply online, it could be apply to a school, apply for a job, apply for a loan, whatever the case may be, some form of application that you have done. In trying to do that, of course, we were met with so many roadblocks. And we can think of the many things that could happen. Could be that you had internet issues. Could be that the page was set up so technically you couldn't figure out where you needed to go, because quite a number of business places, and I'm not bashing anyone, but some of you need to go and recheck your websites. They're not so user-friendly to those who don't know what they're doing. So you need to ensure you make it nice and plain and straightforward. All right, community service announcement over. So you can talk about the different roadblocks, and people can identify with that, because everybody at some point has an issue with online. So if you're not compliant with it, you're going to have issues. So right there, you have made yourself very relatable to the people you're trying to talk to the people you're trying to persuade. And of course now, the casual observer can draw a conclusion. And this personal experience might not be valid, but you haven't proven it, but they still can share in it some way. So it is not a fact that you have given. Remember that. You haven't given a fact. It's not evidence-based like the other techniques before, where you can check that. You can fact check. for this type of situation, you're basically tapping into their personal experiences, their background, the things that they might know or understand based on what they have been through or what they know people have been through. So your conclusion is not going to be fact-based, but it will be emotional-based, it will be experience-based, and it is just as valid as any other. Because remember we said, emotions are powerful forces. Some things require logic, other things require emotion. So now, we achieve this how? So you use a short account of a particular incident or event of an amusing nature. Remember now, you bring up a situation that somebody can relate to. Then you make sure that your conclusion is valid even though you can't fact check it. And then it is easier for people to believe something that someone else has experienced than it is for some people to process various statistics and figures and so on, because not everybody, again, is mathematical. So telling them 50%, 80%, 20%, yes, that's good, but not everybody can relate to that. And remember now, when you're writing for a variety of people. So it's not just one type of audience that you're trying to persuade. And at the end of the day, you need to pull out all the stops. So you need to incorporate various mechanisms so that if it's somebody who requires logic, you give them logic. If it's somebody who requires emotion, you give them emotion. So not everybody can relate to the whole idea of facts and figures, but there are some who better relate to a personal or a shared experience. They can understand what you're saying because it is something that they can visualize, something that they can see happening, something that they might have experienced themselves. So, remember now, same scenario being used. So, think of a supporting argument for vacationing abroad being better than staying at home. Think of an argument opposing the idea that vacationing abroad is better than staying at home. And you're going to be using what again? Right, using an anecdote. So you want a little personal story, something that people can again relate to. And because they can relate to it, then they can understand where you're coming from, they can see your point, and most importantly, accept and agree with it. Finished? You ready? All right, so let's have a look. So a supporting detail you could pull on. My first vacation abroad was such a memorable experience that I would encourage anyone who is able to go overseas for their own vacation. So right there, you have told them that it was such a happy time, such a wonderful time, you had such great fun that you would encourage anybody to do the same thing. So right here, person who is listening who might not have thought about it can say, well, it worked for him, it worked for her, so maybe it can work for me too. Now, of course, we have to think of the other side of the coin. So here's the thing that you could say. My first vacation abroad was such a stressful experience that I would encourage anyone who is able to stay home for their own vacation. So we have two sides of the coin. One person has said it was memorable, it was pleasurable, it was wonderful. So they'd encourage you to go. The other person, based on their personal experience that they have shared, says that nothing like that happened. It was so stressful. And that is a powerful notion to bring up because most people who are of sane minds want to avoid stress or want to avoid adding stress to the stress they already have. So by bringing that up, you are therefore saying to somebody who is feeling very stressed out and is about to take a vacation to de-stress, going abroad is not going to do it for you. Going abroad is going to add to what you're trying to already avoid. Going abroad is going to cause you more stress than you already have. Do you really want to do that, sir? Do you really want to do that, miss? So right there, your audience is listening and thinking, but the whole point of a vacation is to relax. But if you said you went and it was stress, I don't want any stress. I want to relax. Maybe I should just stay home, sit this one out. All right, so we're going to look at using generalizations. Of course, what is a generalization? So you use this when the writer assumes that what goes for some goes for all or a much larger group. So the idea is you're extrapolating an idea onto people. So you know that a lot of people believe this, so you're going to just say, everybody believes it. But please, be careful. So how do we achieve it now? So you use a sweeping statement. That's what they're called, a sweeping generalization. And what this does is suggest that this situation is indeed true and factual. So you've used this statement in such a way that people believe that it really goes off it true. So look at this example now. Today's young royals are rich, famous, and fond of partying. So that is a sweeping statement, because how many of the royals really behave like this? However, in the public sphere, they see several royals behaving like this. So it is easy for someone to believe that it doesn't only hold for those that they see in the media or online or wherever it is, but it's for all of them. So you've made this statement, and because it holds true for enough people, then most people will subscribe to it as well. And of course, it is powerful. And why is it powerful? Notice it appeals to commonly held beliefs, prejudice, and views. So preconceived notions are what you're tapping into here. So people already have this belief in the back of their mind. People already have this idea, have this notion. So you're exploiting it. And you're exploiting it in order to get them to agree with you and to believe what you're saying. So you know that many people hold a certain belief. So of course they're going to make it sound like it's not just many people, it's everybody who has this belief. So now, these are things that many people would be talking about. These are things that would be common knowledge, what you would call common knowledge. So it's something that is not a secret per se. However, I cautioned you earlier and I caution you again. Be careful with using the generalization, because you can make a faulty one. So try not to make a generalization that is blatantly incorrect. You don't want to make a generalization that is going to put you in a bad light. You remember now, you make your generalization based on the fact that it is a commonly held belief. And because it's a commonly held belief, then you can run with it. But if you're going to make a generalization based on something that only you believe, then you are at risk now of seeming as if you're being biased, because you alone believe this, or very few people believe this, and you have made it seem as if it's a common belief. Be very careful. So here's what you're going to work on while we go for a break. So you're going to use generalizations to come up with a point to support and a point to oppose this issue. Same issue we've been working on all morning. So come up with something to prove that you must stay home for vacation, or something to prove that you should go away. Let's look at one that you could have used to support. People who vacation abroad have had numerous exciting experiences to share. So right here, you are saying that everyone, basically, who goes away for vacation comes back with many experiences that they want to share, many exciting experiences. I say imperative word there, many exciting experiences to share. And on the flip side, you could have said, no one who has vacationed at home has ever expressed disappointment or regret in their decision. So right there now, you're establishing the idea that people who choose to stay home don't feel bad about staying home. They feel just as good as those who go away. No one who's ever stayed home for vacation told anybody that they were disappointed or that they regretted staying home. So you think of those options. So generalizations can be used effectively to persuade your audience. However, remember I said be very careful. You don't want to make a faulty generalization because you can lose marks for that. So if you make a generalization and in Jamaican parlance, not no go so, you are at risk. So of course we touched on this in a previous lesson, the use of humor. Laughter is good medicine, you know, and it's a good persuasive technique too. So when you use humor, what you're doing is accessing the audience's innate propensity for mirth to engender them to taking your side. So basically, you're tapping into people's feel good genes and emotions in order to lighten the mood, lighten the tone, and get them to be more receptive of what you're saying. Because if you put someone at ease, then of course they'll be more inclined to listen. And if they're more inclined to listen, then they're more inclined to believe. And that is what you're aiming for. Remember I said, no, this is low-key manipulation that you're doing. So here's how we work on it now. So you're going to provide a more engaging and friendly tone. So as I said before in a previous lesson, you don't want to be too serious right throughout the whole argument you're making. Yes, you need to be serious, but you can also lighten the mood, lighten the tone, and break up the tension that you have created so that your listener, your reader doesn't feel as if they are being pressured into agreeing with you. You can switch roles, you can switch gears, and make it more lighthearted. So you can also use the humor now to dismiss any opposing view, and you can use various methods to do this. So here's an example now. Whenever it rains inside the free houses as well. Now, I've said this before. Humor is not always slapstick. It's not always hold your belly and laugh humor. Sometimes it's just a little, oh my Jesus, really? That type of humor, and that's fine too. So humor can be more sardonic, it can be more sarcastic too, but it is still classified as humor because you have given somebody something to chuckle about. So if it's even something to shake their head and say, oh Lord, geez, they really said that? That is fine. Nothing wrong with that. So you sway the audience now by having them become part of the joke. So when you tell them that it rains inside the house, anybody who has ever experienced a leaking roof can identify with this. So they say, oh my, it's bad for true. So, of course, how are you going to employ humor now to support this or employ humor to oppose this? Think carefully. Something humorous, maybe slapstick, maybe just sarcastic, fine, as long as it's something lighter than usual, to tell us why we should stay home or why we should go abroad for vacation. Ready? Sure you are. So to support it, yes, stay at home where Mauta Masidori, who you see every day and who you desperately want to get away from, lives. So right there you have conjured up this image of somebody in the community, probably even in the house, who is very, very talkative of others' business. For an opposing view now, imagine have to run like your life depends on it to catch a flight while trying to shepherd wayward children, haul multiple bags of luggage, and maintain your sanity simultaneously. Again, this is some very disturbing images now, because everybody will feel traumatized by now. You're going to laugh if you see somebody else going through it, but you don't want to put your own self through it. So the humor here is at the idea of going through this. And the humor here is effective because you can picture this in your mind. You have 3 children, 4, maybe more, and you have to be corralling all of them. You have to be hauling all kind of bag and pan. You have to be, oh my goodness, that's not a nice sight to think of. So the use of attack or praise. So of course, when you give an unflattering or a flattering expression, you are trying to influence your audience to either like them if it's flattering or dislike them if it's unflattering. So you attack them to engender dislike, or you praise them in order to get them to like them. So when you attack, of course, you're going to be belittling a group or an individual. And when you praise them, you want to make them look very outstanding. So you're going to say the best things about them in order to get them to look good. So here's your example now. The sorry state of the community's economy is not just a consequence of drought, but more than a century of dysfunctional management. So right here you have attacked the management of this community. So you're saying that it's not the drought alone that caused the community to be suffering right now. Mismanagement has greatly contributed to that. And of course, when you attack, it makes us think badly of the person or the group. And when you praise, it makes us think great things about the person or the group. But still, you must have caution. So you can offend someone if you alienate the audience. So be careful when you use an attack or you try to ridicule an institution, because you don't know who in your audience might be associated with that institution. So you don't want to offend them, and therefore, once you offend them, how are you going to persuade them again? Think about it. So here is our scenario. You know this, you love it, you've been working on it, yes. And here's what we can do about it. So, to support the notion, traveling abroad for vacation allows for the development of a level of sophistication that vacationing at home is unlikely to provide. So the people who go away are more sophisticated. You're praising them. As opposed to those who opt to vacation abroad rather than support local economy are disloyal to their country.